All right, good everybody. This is E. Marcel Pertut, and welcome to another edition of the Sports Inquirer Show. We are recording on April 6, 2021. Hope all of you are doing well out there in the world. We have a full show for you today. We're going to recap the national championship game in NCAA men's basketball between Gonzaga and Baylor. I have some thoughts on Hubert Davis being the new head coach at North Carolina for men's basketball. We'll transition to the technical state of Georgia athletics, and we'll touch on some college athletics there. Next up will be the free kick, where we will preview tonight's contest for Atlanta United as they open up CONCACAF Champions League action. And then we'll transition over to beanball. The Major League Baseball season is completing its first week of action. There's been some news and notes from around the league I want to touch on. And then finally, in the miscellaneous department, I'll go into other news in the world of sports and then what I'm watching on Netflix. I've been on a good documentary kick lately, watching some things on there, and I have some opinions of what I've seen from there. As always, if you want to follow everything that we're doing, you can head to the mothership, thesportsinquirer.net. There you will see all of our latest updates on our social media platforms as well. You can go there on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Sports Inquirer. You'll see everything that we are doing. And then finally, subscribe to us on YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, or wherever you get your audio and video content. Just do a search for us on there and you will find us. You can also subscribe to us, and I've seen a few subscriptions from the site, our WordPress site, sportsinquirer.net. Those have been really good to see. That is a great way to keep track of everything that we are doing also. So that makes sure you can every time we put a post on there, like you'll see with this podcast, and then hopefully later on today, we're going to do another edition of the Verbal Submission where we will delve into the world of professional wrestling and mixed martial arts. Every time there's an update on our shows or interviews, we have some good interviews I think lined up for later on this week. You go to those platforms and you will see updates of everything that we are doing. So I highly recommend that you check us out in that regard. Obviously, the biggest news coming out of the weekend was the national championship game. And we have a new champion in college basketball for the men in Baylor. The Bears were able to defeat Gonzaga last night by the score of 86 to 70. It was weird. I was taking notes throughout the contest, and really midway through the first half and really the first few minutes of the second half, the only note was Baylor was just a better team. And these were the two best teams in college basketball all throughout the season. Preseason, they were ranked 1 and 2, and throughout the year, they were the best. Some teams were able to elevate themselves kind of in the top five and make some noise. We saw Illinois and Michigan, make bids to be the top teams in the country. But these two were the best. Obviously, Gonzaga came into the national championship game undefeated on the season. Baylor was a team that what really happened with Baylor is in the middle of the season, the COVID pandemic really hit them hard, and they had to shut down all activities for 2 to 3 weeks. And they were undefeated at that time, and they ended up coming back to play. They lost at Kansas, a pretty good margin. They lost in the Big 12 tournament. Those were only two losses on the season. So the tone of or people thinking Baylor would be a national championship contender was subdued compared to Gonzaga and those two losses. But I said on our previous shows, and for once, well, I got the national championship game right in my predictions. I picked Gonzaga to win. They lost. But I said at the beginning of the term, remember I had four number one seeds make it to the final four. Only two of them made it. But I said that in the end, those were the two best teams throughout the tournament, and it played out. Now, if you go to the final four, Baylor handled Houston pretty easily. UCLA and Gonzaga obviously played in a classic, one of the best games you will ever see in college basketball. I had to take a step back and think, was it the best college basketball game I've ever seen? I still think the Duke Kentucky regional final back in '92 was probably the best game that I ever saw from Philadelphia. Obviously, the highlight of that game was the Grant Hill full court pass to Christian Laettner for the game winning shot. We've all seen that highlight a million times. I thought that was the best game that I've ever seen. Now, I was born in 1981, so anything from the 70s and the 60s, obviously, I was not alive for. And if it was anything really in the 80s, I must admit, if you want to go to North Carolina State in Houston, the '83 national championship game with the Villanova Georgetown national championship game in '85, even the 1990 uh, national championships or national semifinal between Duke and UNLV. Remember, the UNLV came to the defending national champions, came to the Final Four undefeated, beat Duke by 30 in the national championship game the previous year in 1990. Duke was able to win the come out with the victory. Someone say that's the best game ever, or one of the best games. I saw that game. I was a little. I mean, I've obviously seen a replay. I was a little too young to really remember that. But as I said, the '92 game I remember a little bit better. But as I said, it's probably the best game I've seen in college basketball over the past 5 to 10 years. Tremendous effort. Obviously, the Jalen Suggs, the near half court shot, bank shot in the end to win the contest was the ultimate game winner. And I bring that contest up to transition into last night's game. I really thought that you looked at the contest, Gonzaga looked fatigued in that first half. Now, you would think, hey, these are college kids. They have a lot of energy. They should have tiredness should not be a factor. But that was an emotional game that they went through to get to the national championship game against Baylor. And I thought they started off slow. We saw Baylor score, I think, the first 10, 11 points of the contest. And Gonzaga just was not able to make it, just get things going. A lot of that was Baylor's defense. I was texting with somebody, another basketball fan, and I was saying Baylor's offense has been outstanding, and that's been a big factor in the victory. I really should have said it was Baylor's defense. From the very beginning of the game, you saw them hassle the entire Gonzaga offense. Jalen Suggs getting 2 fouls early in the half really hurt him. He ended up, I think, and we'll get to the individual statistics in a moment. Statistically, he scored a decent amount of points, but he's the guy that gets the team going. I know they have some of the post players that are known. And so we'll get to the individual stats in a moment. But Suggs having the 2 fouls did not help. And Baylor defensively were just so aggressive and were able to get everything that they wanted to, or force Gonzaga to do whatever they wanted on the defensive end. That was just very tough for Baylor to overcome. But I mean, if you look at the statistics overall, Gonzaga actually shot 50% from 51% from the field, but they also had 18 less field goal attempts than Baylor did. You look at the 3 pointers, Baylor had made 10 3 pointers, Gonzaga only had 5. The other statistics, rebounding. Baylor out rebounded Gonzaga 38 to 22, including 16 offensive rebounds. So many second chance opportunities for Baylor in the contest. I think was a big factor, in the victory. And obviously Jared Butler, who was named the MOP, most outstanding player. He scored 22 points in the contest, along with 7 assists. They just have so many guys in that rotation that give you trouble. Mitchell, Teague, all those guys. Those guys had double figures. Flagler had 13 points off the bench for Baylor. They can bring in so many rotation guys, especially in the guard spots, that come in very aggressive defensively and limit your opportunities. And that's what Baylor, was able to do. And Suggs, as I mentioned, he had 22 points in the contest, but just was unable to really get things going consistently for them. And look, Tim May is an excellent player, and Kispert. Those are two guys, all conference players, all American consideration, for those guys, the post players for Gonzaga. But the physicality of Baylor was very impressive. They just were able, not only from the guards, but also the post players. And you look at their roster of Baylor, a lot of juniors and seniors, a lot of grown men, on that roster. A lot of physical guys from 6'3" to 6'8", all strong, wide shouldered, and were just able to push Gonzaga around, for the entire contest. I don't think the shock was necessarily Baylor winning, because Mr. Baylor is, I know they had the 2 losses, as I mentioned, in the regular season, but they are. I mean, they were a national championship contender from the very beginning of the year. As I said, they were preseason number 2, so they're not coming out of nowhere. But the physicality of their play, I thought, was the biggest factor, in the contest. And respect the Baylor for a national championship and getting to that mark. If you know about Bliss and the scandal that went on in Baylor before Drew got there, it, that was a program, not death penalty, but it was one of those deals where this program may not survive. Well, it would not get to a elite level maybe ever again. And trust me, if you do the research of what was going there on there with Bliss and what was going on with his players, it went beyond the basketball court as far as scandal. Some tragic involvements in there. But for Drew to go there and to rebuild that program and make them a national championship contender the past few years, and now to complete it with tremendous respect to him at a program that's not considered a blue blood. It's not North Carolina, Duke, Kentucky, Louisville, even in Indiana or UCLA, teams that are trying to get back to that blue blood level. Kansas, obviously those programs that you look at year in year out as these teams should be competing on a national level, and for the most part, those teams do. I said Baylor in the Big 12. Obviously, you think of Texas. Usually, football is the main sport, but he has done a good job building that program, and obviously, they are now a national champion winner. As far as Gonzaga, going for the perfect season did not happen. You have to win, and you only have one loss in the season. It's in the national championship game, and you think that's a disappointing season. I don't necessarily think it's disappointment. Obviously, they are disappointed. You want to win a national championship, and in that sport, it's all up. And if you've reached the level Gonzaga has, where they are perennially a top 5 team, this is their second Final Four appearance, second appearance in the national championship game. You want to win it. That's the goal of a program like Gonzaga. But you have to wonder, will they be able to get back to this mark? Baylor was in this kind of the same category. I mean, I know that we've talked about the future of college basketball. Maybe it's you programs like a Baylor and Gonzaga that like to recruit guys who are maybe get transfers, more mature, older rosters. The days of having 4 or 5 McDonald's All Americans on the roster, all freshmen and sophomores, winning a championship is going to be less likely. One, because the synergy is so tough to get in such a short amount of time, and then two, more with the impending changes in the eligibility for the NBA draft and now the G League option, or high school player that go to G League out of high school or play internationally. Less of the 5-star recruits are going to be going to college campuses. That's a potential reality. So the national programs that I've mentioned, the Kentuckys and Dukes, they're still going to get their top stud players because those programs are so strong. But it does open the door maybe for some other programs to approach it with. We're going to have a veteran squad. We'll have NBA talent, but not that guy that we know is going to leave in a year or two. So we're going to have a team full of upperclassmen that have played together for a long time, and that's the approach we're going to take. And Baylor and Gonzaga have gone with that approach. I mean, Suggs is the exception. Obviously, he's going to be a top 5 pick in the NBA draft. He's all the accolades you could ever have for an incoming freshman. We get that. But I think that for Gonzaga, you don't get these opportunities, too often to be undefeated in a national championship game. And as long as Few was there, they built to get such a good program. They're not going to fall off the map. But you really have to take advantage of these opportunities of becoming a national championship, and Gonzaga was unable to do that. News that also came out over really yesterday, before the national championship game, was Hubert Davis is now the new head coach at North Carolina. We saw Roy Williams retire earlier on last week. He announced his retirement from the program, won 3 national titles for the Tar Heels, Hall of Fame, legendary all-time college basketball coach. And the question was, who's going to replace him? And you knew it was going to be a North Carolina guy. And for two reasons. One, programs like that, and Duke is going to deal with the same thing when Krzyzewski retires. Those programs, they very much like to have guys that know the system, know the secret handshakes, know everything that's going on there. And would a Tony Bennett do a good job in North Carolina? Of course. Or a Brad Stevens, obviously. Guys that are all time all potential all timers in coaching, and guys that are young and everything like that. So we get that, but they would like to have a Carolina guy. From Dean Smith was Carolina guy. Roy Williams, obviously. Even when they went with Doherty, in the past, and that's what they like to do, is get a guy from that program. And two, they have a lot of options. Obviously, they've produced a lot of coaches and former players and all around the country that have North Carolina ties to choose from. So it's not like they're picking from a bad lot of players or former assistants and coaches and everything like that. And they stayed in house with Hubert Davis. I think it's a good move in several ways or several reasons. One, he has been an assistant there for a very long time. And remember, he was an analyst on ESPN, and he became an assistant coach at North Carolina under Roy Williams. And that's kind of we looked at that in odd ways. Like, why would he leave that? uh, I thought it was to leave a job as an analyst and become an assistant coach. Obviously, his ties to North Carolina were strong, and he made that move. And he's been an assistant for a long time with them. No head coaching experience, which is always tricky. But he has been with that program for close to a decade now as an assistant. He obviously played at North Carolina under Dean Smith. He played in the NBA, so he has that professional caveat with him. He can talk about being a former NBA player and knowing what it takes to get there. So I think that's a good perspective for him to have. He's their first black head coach. I think that's a good thing. We usually don't talk about race and on our show, and we try to keep it objective, but it is something that you have to acknowledge that he is a black man in that position, and I think that it does help with recruiting, helps with his experiences. So I think that's a good thing. Now he's quali. I'm not saying he got the job because he is black. That's not the case. He obviously, I say, he's been an assistant there a long time. He has a lot of ties there, so he's more than qualified for the gig. But you do have to acknowledge that. Now it's maybe the best job in college basketball. So it's big responsibility. I mean, I've been to North Carolina. It is a beautiful campus, beautiful atmosphere. They love their basketball, and you look up at the Raptors, and they expect championships. I mean, the standard is, whilst the best job, is also the highest standards, and he knows that, and everything that goes with it. But I still think that's a very good move for North Carolina and what they're trying to do. All right, let's transition to the free kick portion of our show and preview Atlanta United's contest tonight in the CONCACAF Champions League. The Atlanta United out of Major League Soccer will begin the Scotiabank CONCACAF Champions League play for 2021 today against LD Alajuelense out of Costa Rica, and that is the first leg in the round of 16. Atlanta United is in the competition for the third consecutive year. Only Deportivo Saprissa can say that as far as being in the last three editions of the contest. And Atlanta's three consecutive appearances is tied for the third longest run for MLS clubs since 2009, trailing only Toronto and LA Galaxy, who have had 10 years of four consecutive appearances in the Champions League. So this is a big moment for Atlanta United, not only starting off the Champions League, but also under new manager Gabriel Heinze. The Argentinian joined the team in the offseason as the new manager, and this is their first time playing under him in competition. Here is Mikey Ambrose on Gabriel Heinze and what it's been like being coached by him so far this year.
Yeah, no, I think we've been working on it now for a couple months, and I think we got it down pretty well. With each team you play against, they play a different system, so you have to kind of rotate the triangle around or rotate yourselves around. But I think with these preseason games we've played, they've played different systems to play in those games, watch video, learn from them, and I think we're ready. I think this last game, we played, the movement was there, the chances were there, and I think it's gonna be pretty good going into April 6th.
Captain Brad Guzan also shared his thoughts on hindsight ahead of tonight's contest.
I would say he's certainly more similar to Tata than Frank, in terms of his ideas, in terms of how he sees the game, and also from a tactical standpoint of what he's asking of players in terms of getting up and down the field. So I would certainly say that. And then in terms of differences, from how he is from last year to now, obviously you talk about in terms of his intensity, in terms of his work rate and what he wants out of guys from an individual standpoint, but also from a collective standpoint. And you look at the specifics and the fine details that he pays attention to and what he's asking of guys. I think that is, in terms of responsibility, there's a lot more responsibility being asked of guys on the field to understand what's happening in the midst of the game in split seconds, and being able to process that information and make adjustments accordingly. And it's certainly, I would say, a little bit more complex than in years past.
Now, Atlanta owns an all-time record of 4-3-1 in Champions League play and has advanced to the quarterfinal stage in each of the past two seasons. So while they're undefeated in 4 contests at home or neutral sites during the competition, they are still winless on the road during the competition at 0-3-1, which means in their 4 contests in the Champions League, they have 3 losses and 1 tie. So they have struggled away from Metro Atlanta in the competition. Here is Ambrose on the preparations of the team ahead of tonight's match.
I think we were prepared for 2019, but I think we're even more prepared for this one. We were able to come in pretty early, and the guys came in here voluntarily together pretty early, so we were able to mesh well together. And once coach took over, we've been doing a lot of 2-a-days, a lot of sessions, a lot of video, a lot of learning. So I'm confident going into April 6th. I think we're ready.
And Alajuelense sits atop of the standings in the Costa Rica First Division with 34 points and have a 6-point lead in that competition through 16 matches. So while Atlanta has not started their season yet, the Costa Rican squad has already played 16 matches in regular season play. So they do come in with much more, not more necessarily experience, but much more game action than Atlanta United does in tonight's contest. And the team, as I said, they're actually undefeated so far in the Costa Rican First League, and they lead the league in goals, a 31, goals against a 9, and goal difference with a plus 22 margin. Here is Guzan on facing the Costa Rican squad.
What makes them dangerous, I think when you watch video of their games, you look at the amount of numbers they get in the box. Obviously playing with 2 strikers, that two big strong guys that are willing to link up with each other, but also willing to link up with wingers, with their central midfielders. That instantly causes the opposition a problem. And then on top of that, you look at how they play with their wingers. Their wingers tend to play a bit more narrow, allowing space for their fullbacks to attack. And so when their fullbacks get forward, they've instantly created one guy on the ball, but then there's 4 guys in the box. So in terms of their ability to get numbers in and around the goal, to follow up rebounds, to follow seconds, balls that are partially cleared, they do a good job of finding those second balls.
And with all of that, here is Guzan also about the team's confidence heading into the contest.
Yeah, the confidence is good. The confidence is high, and there isn't a reason for it not to be. It's been a hard preseason in terms of the work that we've put in. But when you put in hard work, when you graft and you get after it for numerous weeks, you come out feeling stronger on the other side, and that's how we feel now. So the real test starts tomorrow. The real game starts tomorrow, and that's when we'll start to measure exactly where we are.
So we'll be keeping track of everything going on tonight with Atlanta United in the Champions League, and on our next show we'll have a recap of the contest. News also coming out at the Atlanta United camp is the retirement of original player. I guess you could say original player, but he was on the first team in franchise history, but Jeff Larentowicz, who is retiring after a decade plus of playing professional soccer. Obviously, he came to Atlanta and was on the very first team there. The inaugural team was also on the team that won the MLS Cup a few years ago, a major contributor to the franchise. We'll have more on Larentowicz on our next show, but Brad Guzan did speak about Larentowicz and his contributions to the team and his career. So here's Guzan on Jeff.
He is the pros pro. To have the career that he's had, to be able to call him a teammate, one of our leaders here at this club, to see the career that he's had and the amount of work that he's put into his career. I tip my hat to him, plain and simple. When I saw the news this morning, instantly started texting with him back and forth, saying congratulations. And we had been in touch over the last couple of weeks. And while he was trying to figure out kind of what the next step is. And every time I said, I hope it's whatever you want, because he certainly deserves it. Like I said, the amount of work that he's put into his career, grafting, grinding, and making it work at a very high level for so long. He's a pro's pro. And so I wish him all the best from a club standpoint. We wish him all the best. And I know he'll be successful with whatever he does next.
And obviously, Larentowicz was a major contributor to Atlanta United, served as a vice captain for several years, first under Parker's. And then, and technically, he did have some captaincy with the team last season, sharing that responsibility with Guzan. But as I said, won an MLS Cup, won a U.S. Open Cup with Atlanta United, a very solid career for Larentowicz. And I said, we'll have some more thoughts on Jeff's career and his impact on the team when we do our recap of the CONCACAF Champions League later on this week. All right, so let's transition over to Beanball and the Major League Baseball season finally starting up this week. Yeah, just overall impressions. Glad to have baseball back and teams playing in stadiums. It was weird seeing Texas, the Rangers, opening up their season with a full house. And it's not political, but it's does tie into COVID and the pandemic. They have decided to have open stands and with no restrictions in their stadium for this year, at least for now. So they had a full house in there. Now this also is the last year. Remember, they were unable. They had the new stadium and were unable to do a full opening. So this is their first year of having the full stadium opportunities, I guess, to play in there. But yeah, seeing all those fans in the stands is a little dicey. But if you go to the games, that's on you, I guess. But the good when I say that, I say that unlike last year where it was closed stadiums for all of these contests, fans have been able to attend the games in different capacities. Some at 25%, some at 50%. Some teams have limited it to like 4,000 or 5,000 but it does add a little bit of ambiance and energy to the stadium. So that's been good to see. But overall impressions of the Major League season, you have to be very careful looking at the first few weeks of the year. And a team may start off 0-4, their season's not over. A team may start off 4-0, they're not going to the World Series. You have to look at it from that way. And I think I was listening to Steve Torrey on Mad Dog Radio, and he brought up a good point. The 1998 Yankees, a team that won 100 plus games, so I'm going to say the best team in modern Major League history, and I think they won 115 games or something in that range. They started the season 1-4 that year. Yeah, so not that no team's going to put together that mark this year, but just be very careful when you look at the standings. I don't. I think we've only had maybe 4 or 5 teams. I know the '84 Tigers did it when out of Detroit, where they led after opening day and kept the lead throughout the entire year. That's very, very hard to do. So just be aware of when you're looking at some of these teams and their records. So I mean, if you're a fan of some teams are doing very well. Kansas City is 3-1. Look, respect to the Royals. I don't think they're not going to win the division. I think Chicago 2-3 with the White Sox. Take a deep breath if you're a White Sox supporter. Things will be all right. Now you have a ball team like Baltimore 3-1 on the year. Now they were able to beat up on Boston to start the year. Good for the Orioles. They're not going to keep that mark up the entire season, but we'll see. Now you look at the West in the AL. Houston's 4-1. They're gonna mash this year. You look at their lineup; they're gonna put up a lot of runs, I should say. The Angels 4-1. Look, I love seeing. And I don't understand why the Keith Olbermans of the world are so negative on Otani trying to pitch and hit. Will he choose one ultimately? Maybe he probably will, but seeing that game against Chicago on Sunday night, where he pitched and hit, throwing more than 100 miles an hour, the top of the inning against the White Sox, and then the bottom half of the inning hitting a solo home run. That is awesome stuff. We should be more impressed and be pushing for guys to play two ways, to be a pitcher and a hitter. It is such a hard, hard thing to do. And for him to have strikeouts in the top half of the inning as a pitcher and then hit a home run in the bottom half, it's awesome. Now, him trying to cover home plate during a play and almost getting his knee taken out. Luckily, I guess it's a sprain and he should be okay. But he needs to be cover the bases better and not just run toward run towards home plate. And because that looked like that could have been a nasty injury, that could have taken him out for the season, and none of us want to see that. But I just was very impressed by seeing him. And you look at the National League. Look, we're based in Atlanta. I'm sure a few of you like the Braves. They're 0-3. It'll be all right. Now I will say this about Atlanta: what you don't like, the pitching has been okay. They got swept in Philadelphia, and they were unable to actually play their game against Washington yesterday. They're going to play today as we were recording this. Looks like because Washington got hit hard with the COVID, and had several players test positive and dealing with all of that. But the thing about Atlanta I don't like is there are a lot of strikeouts in that lineup, and you can't have that. But the thing is, they're very streaky, and they have professional hitters on that team. Acuna and Ozzy Albies and Freddie Freeman and Ozuna are going to be, and Dansby Swanson to a lesser degree, are going to be able to put up some good numbers and be consistent. Some of them, like a Freeman, are going to hit for high averages. But what you saw in Philadelphia is that there also are a lot of holes in that lineup as far as strikeouts, a lot of non-contact, especially at that top of the lineup with Acuna. And when he's rolling, he could be a top 5, 10 player in all of baseball. But if he's not cooking, he's not hitting the ball enough. He's not putting the contact on the ball enough. And that leads to a lot of strikeouts at the top of your lineup. And that can really hurt your lineup overall. But Philadelphia 4-0. And I picked Philadelphia finish 4th in the division. And right now they're undefeated and leading. So I still think they're going to average out to that. But you do have to acknowledge their bullpen, which was historically bad last year, has, I don't think, allowed a run yet this season, or has allowed them maybe only one or two. Now it's only 4 games, it's a small sample size. But as I said, their bullpen last year was historically bad. So if they could get cut that down in half from what they did last year, they might be a wild card contender in that regard. So you do have to acknowledge that Philadelphia is playing very well. The Dodgers are 4-1. I picked them and the Yankees to be in the World Series. And by the way, the Yankees as well. I know they had some struggles but against Toronto at home to open the season. The Yankees will be fine. They'll be in the postseason and they'll be a contender. But I said the Dodgers are 4-1, still looking very good. I did not like hearing about Fernando Tatis with I guess he has a partially separated shoulder from a swing that he did a night ago. I mean, that's bad news, for them. I think their division is still not very good. San Francisco, Colorado, and Arizona are all 500 and worse so far this year. So I think that with San Diego and the Dodgers, they're both going to be playoff teams. But for Tatis, though, anytime you separate a shoulder, I don't care what the situation is, that's not good. But we'll just keep an eye on that to see everything that is going on. And I will acknowledge this because we are talking baseball and it does tie to a lot that's going on. We talked about it in our last show, but I'll talk about it again. The Major League Baseball All Star Game has been moved from Atlanta. It has been removed from there and is going to be in Colorado this year. As I said, the only thing I will say about the All Star Game being moved, it's a tough situation for all parties involved. Obviously, it is a response to the voter rights acts or laws have been enacted in the state of Georgia. Some feel that they have bad racial overtones and are limiting the ability for people to vote for various reasons. And I think Major League Baseball is trying to be proactive because I think what was going to happen is that you're going to see players and officials because we're going to boycott the game. And I'm not going to name we've heard names of certain players that probably were going to boycott the All Star game if it was in Atlanta, in the state of Georgia. Major players, and you may have a point, or to the point where if a player on say one, we'll say like a Dodger, if Mookie Betts was going to protest, he's going to be an All Star. If he was going to boycott the game, you think Cody Bellinger or Walker Buehler or Clayton Kershaw, his teammate, they're going to come to Atlanta while their teammate is protesting? No, and that becomes a trickle down effect to a lot of that going on. So that's happened. I'm not going to get into the Democrats and Republicans, each of them grandstanding with their opinions on it, whether they're for or against it, and using it for their political gain. That's shade what they do. But I will say it will hurt the local businesses here in Metro Atlanta, and that's the disappointing part about it. You have they just a lot of restaurants, the hotels, things along those lines. That's very bad. Delta and Coca-Cola and Home Depot, which are the major um, Fortune 500 companies that you hear about that are based in Georgia, they'll be all right. They'll be okay. With the All Star Game could be on the moon, and they will not be affected at all by all that's going on. But if you watch the local news and you read the local stories about restaurants and some businesses around the stadium or just in Atlanta in general that were expecting some good business over that week long period of really the 3-4 days of the All Star game, from really the weekend of Saturday and Sunday, people starting to come into town, and then Monday and Tuesday when the game is actually played. Those businesses really were hurt by it. And I know they're saying that they'll cut a check for those businesses that would have gained money from the All Star game. It's Trust me, if you know about bureaucracy, we'll see when that check is cut. It's not as good as actual tangible people in your establishment. From that front, and it goes, I say, beyond the restaurants, hotels, taxi drivers, all those businesses would have benefited greatly, from it. But the game has been moved to Colorado, and that's just the reality of the situation. I will say this though, it's a very tricky precedent. If you're going to move the All Star game, you gotta be careful. The Masters is taking place this week. Are you gonna move? Are you not gonna have play? Are you not gonna have the Masters in Georgia? Are you not gonna if you're bent on these things? What about the Hawks? Are you not gonna have Hawks games? Are you not gonna have the Falcons? They play Major League Baseball. I mean the NFL. You have to be very careful with these things. And if you're gonna pick on one state with Georgia, and I said I'm a Georgia resident, and there's some issues with that bill and everything like that. I get that. But I think you could look around to every other state of the union and have this same thing. We saw a few years ago with the transgender bathroom bill in North Carolina. Yeah, Colorado, they're not perfect. None of the states are perfect with their rules and their plans. So I know they moved the game to Colorado. I'm waiting for the report. Colorado has a bill that discriminates against this group of people or can be looked at as racist or sexist and all that stuff. It's in the law books. Every state has these issues. So I think it's very tough to pull something from one state and move it to another unless you just cancel the game completely, which we know is not going to happen. So those are my thoughts on that. And I said we'll see what transpires from there. We're going to wrap up the show in miscellaneous department and things that are going on in the world. As I said, I watched some Netflix documentaries. The first one I saw was White Boy, which was on Richard Wersher, which is the story of the Detroit drug dealer, alleged drug dealer in the 1980s, who was arrested and has been in jail. He actually just got released a few years ago. I did not see the White Boy Rick is what he's known by. I did not see the feature film, the one Matthew McConaughey. I just saw the documentary on him. Very intriguing of what I saw in that. You look at the political corruption in the city of Detroit, really in the state of Michigan, and ties to the crack epidemic, and how this guy kind of got caught up in it. He was involved with the players in the drug game, but he just kind of became, I don't want to say an innocent bystander, but he was really the guy that was charged and pretty much he had a certain amount of grams of cocaine on him, and for some people that would have been a maybe 5 year sentence. He got 25 plus years in jail for it. I'm laughing because if you watch the documentary, it is really absurd the ruling on him. Now, I say he wasn't an angel, but you look at some of the guys who were literal murderers and literal drug kingpins. They got 5 to 10 years and were out of jail. And this guy who was a very minor player in the drug game got a lot of years for it. And I say, yeah, Chris Hansen's in it, who we all know from his days as an NBC News correspondent to Catch a Predator. He cut his teeth in the journalism game in Detroit, so you get to see a lot of clips of him and his involvement in it. But it just really shows the corruption of. You had the mayor of Detroit involved in it. His niece was married to a drug kingpin, and how he was shielding a lot of. He was pretty much with the funding of the drugs. It's very corrupt. The way, and as I said, this was Detroit. You probably head to any major metropolitan city in the United States and see the same type of corruption. But it was just very interesting seeing the drug game in the 80s and 90s and all that was going on and just the racial undertones of it, of this drug cartel run by blacks and the one white person involved in it, and his father's involved in it as well. And you also had the FBI, and he was an FBI informant, Richard Wersher, and how they did not have his back. They pretty much were telling him to commit crimes and be an informant. And then when time came and they got a lot of information, But when he got caught up in it, and the FBI did not have his back, it's very fascinating. If you watch the documentary, it's on Netflix. I also saw the Challenger documentary. Obviously, we know about this was the Challenger was the spacecraft that blew up in 1986. We all know the story with that. Really good documentary there. Talk to the family members of the deceased astronauts from that tragedy. I've now it's interesting because I was born in 1981, so I was 5 years old when it happened. So I just miss seeing it on TV. Like I've talked to people about it a lot over the years. A lot of people that are teenage, well, they were elementary school at the time or teenagers, because it was the teacher on the plane and on the spacecraft, and it was obviously watched by everybody, and you saw 7 people die on live on television and everything that came with it. Unfortunately, very good documentary though with NASA and how the O-rings, the malfunctioning of that ship could have been prevented many times over. And I said I've watched other movies and other things on, so really didn't glean new information for me necessarily, but it was interesting hearing from the family members and from people in NASA, and then the the manufacturer of the O-rings that malfunctioned, and how the conditions of that flight of that day was very cold. It was counterproductive to actually fly on. It could have been prevented in many ways. But it was a different look at it. You learn more about the actual astronauts that died that day. So you got to see their backstories a little bit more. But it was just uh, tough to watch at times because you're shaking your head so much during it. And I don't want to say corruption, not like the white boy documentary I mentioned earlier. Just the incompetence and the lack of foresight to have it was very so preventable. But they do go into the race to space and how there's a lot of pressure from the government to have these flights take place, and things along those lines. So I highly recommend that you check it out. It's really short. It's only 4 hours compared to some other documentaries that can be 10 to 12 hours. It's not a hard watch, in that regard. But yeah, I say it's worth giving a view of that and seeing what's going on there. And that concludes today's show. Thanks for listening to us. As always, you can head to thesportsinquirer.net. You can also go to our social media platforms on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And also subscribe to us on YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, or wherever you get your audio and video content. Until next time, good fight, good night, be safe.